My father looked up from his wine glass and smirked. Surprised you showed up. Didn't think failures liked cake. I paused halfway into the dining room, my boots making the only sound against the polished hardwood. The chandelier above glimmered over a long stretch of white linen, perfectly aligned cutlery, crystal glasses catching candlelight. Every seat was taken. Every head was turned, just not toward me. I hadn't been home in over a decade, and yet nothing had changed. My father's tone still carves like a blade beneath the ribs. I gave him a nod, careful not to let the smirk crack my face. "Cake's free, right?" I said lightly. He looked back down at his glass like I hadn't spoken. There was no place card with my name, no pulled-out chair. The staff stood along the wall, eyes carefully elsewhere. I slid into the empty seat nearest the kitchen doors, right where the steamed garlic and the clatter of dishes could drown out any polite conversation I wouldn't be having. The last time I saw him 14 years ago, I was in fatigues with a duffel on my shoulder. He didn't say goodbye, just handed me a folded napkin with a grocery list and said, "The Army won't make you a leader, just a forgotten name in a file." I folded that list and tucked it into my boot that day, thinking it might be the last thing he ever said to me. I was wrong. The chair to my right shifted. Ethan sat down with the easy grace of someone who had never once had to fight for space. Tailored navy suit, gold watch, hair slicked back with expensive ease. He didn't look at me as he poured himself wine. "Glad you found time in your free schedule now that, what you're done with logistics," he said, eyes still on his glass. I smiled without teeth. Still scheduling things, like funerals. He blinked. That threw him for half a second. Then he gave a tight laugh and turned away to flirt with the cousin on his left, leaving me to the smell of garlic butter and bleach. Frank raised his glass. To family, he said, standing with all the pomp of a self-crowned king. To resilience. To those who stayed when things got hard and rose to the challenge. His hand clapped down on Ethan's shoulder. No mention of me, not even a glance. To Ethan, Frank continued for becoming the man this family can count on, for carrying the name forward. The table erupted in applause. Silverware clinked. My stepmother dabbed at her eyes like she'd just watched a homecoming parade. I didn't raise my glass. I picked at the napkin in my lap, folded the edge until it tore, and kept my face blank. I had lived through gunfire evacuations, sandstorms, and betrayal deeper than this table could hold. But even those memories didn't numb the sting of being so precisely erased. "He's not wrong, you know," Frank said later, leaning toward me just as dessert arrived, some elaborate almond tart with spun sugar shaped like a rose. "You were a mistake we tried to forget. Don't make us remember you again." I stared at him, letting the silence stretch between us like a blade he didn't know I still carried. There was a time when those words would have broken me. Now they just rearranged something inside. My phone vibrated on the table. Restricted call. I swiped to answer, still looking at the father who'd rather invent a daughter that didn't exist than acknowledge the one who did. A voice came through the line. Calm, measured. "Commander Whitaker, we've reviewed the file. You're not forgotten. We need to meet." I walked into the library I once funded, now named after the Whitakers. Even my donations had been rewritten. The brass letters glinted in the morning sun. The Whitaker Family Community Library. I stood at the bottom of the steps, coffee cooling in my hand, and let the insult settle. A decade ago, that plaque had read Windham Hill Community Learning Center, and the funds had come from a foundation I started back when I still believed coming home meant something. Back when I still thought a plaque with no name was better than no plaque at all. The air was cool, spring barely breaking through. Inside, the hush was the same, but the tone had changed. Shelves stood taller than I remembered, more screens than books, and every corner was curated clean, bright, sanitized, like someone had bleached history right off the walls. "Can I help you?" asked a voice. I turned to see a girl, early 20s, tight ponytail, nervous energy. Her name tag read Linda. She gave me the kind of smile reserved for wandering tourists or suspicious strangers. "I'm just visiting," I said, then added, "I used to help fund this place." "Oh, you must be family," she said, suddenly perking up. "Are you with Mr. Ethan's side or Mr. Frank's?" I blinked. "What do you mean side?" She flushed. I just meant never mind. You know, we have a new archive section now for local military service. It's pretty amazing. Want me to show you? Something in her tone was so earnestly oblivious I couldn't be angry. I nodded. We walked past the reading room down a short corridor. The walls were decorated with framed photographs of uniformed men and women. Most I didn't recognize. But one caught my eye, Ethan, in a tailored replica uniform. He stood beside a child holding an American flag hand on her shoulder like he was about to give orders. His jaw looked sharper in black and white, almost noble. That one's popular, Linda said. Mr. Ethan didn't serve, but he said he carries the legacy. I kept my face blank. He said that, and I think it's beautiful. Like, even if you didn't go to war, you can still honor it, right? Sure, I murmured. The archive room was small, cool, and lined with digital terminals. Linda typed something into the main interface. We started digitizing all local records last year, she said. Military stuffs from public domain with help from Whitaker Group PR. Here we even have your name. I stepped closer as she clicked. On screen, a profile opened. Name Anna Whitaker Service. Branch Army Reserve Division Logistics. Non-combatant rank, 2nd Lieutenant Rhett. Discharged administrative leave, confidential. My throat closed. Where did this come from? Linda frowned. It says, courtesy of Whitaker Group Public Affairs Division. See here. She pointed at a small watermark in the corner. Want me to print it? No. I leaned over the terminal and navigated past the user interface, fingers tapping instinctively. The system wasn't locked down. I accessed the metadata uploaded 7 months ago, scrubbed of any combat citations, medals, or incident reports. No mention of my deployment to Fallujah. No record of Travis. No record of anything that mattered. Is something wrong? Linda asked. I stood up. Just dusty history. Nothing a little truth can't clean. Before I could leave, something on the bulletin board caught my eye. A flyer for a new veterans initiative. Honor Forward. Opening soon, Whitaker Veterans Center. There he was, again, Ethan's face this time in color. Smiling. Holding a folded flag like he'd earned it. The caption read, Serving those who served because legacy never dies. Beneath it, smaller text funded by the Whitaker Group, in partnership with the Department of Civic Renewal. I turned to the wall by the exit and saw at the donor plaque. Bronze, elegant, 6 names, all Whitakers, all male. At the bottom, a quote etched in cursive script, We honor the sacrifices of our soldiers and those who carried on where they left off. Frank Whitaker. My chest tightened. My mother's name was gone. So was mine. They'd hollowed me out, then painted over the space. Outside, the sun felt too bright. I sat on the stone steps, letting the warmth hit my back as I pulled out my encrypted phone. My hands were steady, fingers fast. One contact, one line. Do you still have Grace's number? Tent. Grace had the same eyes I remembered, sharp, sleepless, and unafraid of ghosts. The bell above the cafe door gave a soft jingle, but Grace didn't flinch. She was already in the corner booth, back to the wall, staring into a cup of black coffee that looked older than the Formica table. The place was half-dead, faded menus taped to the walls, one flickering bulb, and a waiter who nodded too much and smiled too little. I took the seat across from her without a word. You cut your hair, Grace said. Her voice still had that flat, desert-scorched tone. Didn't think you'd ever come back to this god-forsaken town. I didn't come for nostalgia, I said. I came for the truth. Grace didn't nod. She just reached into her coat pocket and slid a thumb drive across the table. The label was handwritten Whitaker CRN Logistics Discrepancy, V2, unaltered. I stared at it for a beat, then looked up. So you kept it. I kept a lot of things, she said. You remember Travis? The name landed like a match in dry brush. I hadn't said it aloud in years. Of course I remember him. He was the reason I started saving files. Grace continued. The memo you wrote after Fallujah, the one declining promotion, that version was edited before it hit your file. The final line was twisted. I already knew it. But hearing it aloud, it made my spine go rigid. They made it sound like I was covering for an undisciplined soldier. I said. You weren't, Grace replied. I was there. Travis made a split-second call that saved civilians. You backed him. And you were right. The waiter came by with a refill I didn't ask for. He smiled too long. Grace stared him down until he walked away. You think he's with them? I asked under my breath. She nodded once. You were on their radar the moment you set foot in Windham Hill. I slid the drive off the table and into my jacket pocket. Who else knows? I don't know. But I know who buried it. She pulled out a second folder from her bag, creased and sealed with tape. Inside were copies of old reports. Faint watermarks, redacted lines. One page stood out, an investigation brief titled Operation Harrowlight, Secondary Actors and Civilian Interference Risk. Frank Whitaker, Ethan Whitaker, CRN Logistics, all listed under indirect civilian affiliates with flagged influence. I leaned back. How the hell did they get on a military oversight list? Grace shrugged. Contractors hide under all kinds of rocks, but I'm guessing they had help, maybe someone in procurement, maybe higher. Ethan's company was supposedly advising on post-conflict infrastructure. Reality. They were laundering legitimacy. I ran my thumb along the edge of the drive in my pocket. They didn't just change your file, Grace said. They silenced your clearance level. You're redacted now, Anna. You don't exist in half the systems you use to command. It was a strange thing to know you'd been erased before you even noticed. I felt like a ghost in my own uniform, a specter passing through the world with no paper trail. You think this connects to the veteran center they're launching? I asked. Grace nodded. If I had to bet, that's their next PR laundering project, a way to cement legacy and bury what's left of yours. I leaned forward. What about Harrowlight itself? Do you still have the full file? No, she said, but someone does, and I know where to start looking. She slid the folder to me. I didn't open it, not yet. My hands were already full of fire. I saved it, she said, eyes locked to mine, because I believed someday someone might still fight for it. Outside, I stepped into the afternoon light and let the door shut behind me. Then I saw it. Same black SUV, same tinted windows, parked across the street, engine idling, watching, waiting. I didn't break stride. I walked straight past the vehicle like I hadn't seen it, like my pulse wasn't slamming against my ribs. But inside my coat, my fingers closed around the drive like a trigger. The photo should have been destroyed. Instead, it was framed in my mother's study with Travis in the background. He wasn't centered, of course. He never was. Just over Frank's right shoulder, half-shadowed but unmistakable, his square jaw, the cut of his posture, the way he held a clipboard like it might explode. The label beneath the image read, CRN Strategy Meeting, 2019 Magnolia Holdings Private Session. They'd made it look so official. Like Travis had been some corporate aide, not the field sergeant who bled out in a ruined corridor, while Frank Whitaker shook hands with men who sold the bullets. The house was still as I stepped further in. Donna must have left the side door unlocked as promised. The hallway smelled of old wood and lilacs, faint and faded. The study was colder than the rest, heavier. My boots pressed into the same Persian rug from childhood, the one I used to trace with my fingers like a map when Mom was too sick to stand. The shelves held the same heavy books. The desk bore no dust. And there on the credenza the photo stood, glossy, framed in walnut. I turned it over. The back had no label, but a loose edge on the backing caught my eye. Gently I pried it open. There, tucked between the cardboard and glass, folded once and sealed in a plastic slip, was a page I recognized instantly. My breath stalled. It was my mother's handwriting. I unfolded it with reverence, hands suddenly unsteady. The date read July 12th, 2020. The signature matched the Christmas cards she used to send in ink, the exact shade of sea glass. Each loop, each lean hers. To whom it may concern, I, Margaret Whitaker, being of sound mind and full intent, name my daughter Anna Whitaker sole heir to the Windham Hill estate, including holdings, land rights, and residual trust accounts. This reflects my wishes and replaces any previous documentation that omits her name. Margaret Whitaker, not notarized, not filed, but real. I checked the slip again. Behind it was another page, older, brittle with age. A letter from Margaret to Frank. Unsent. You may erase her name from conversations, but not from blood. She wears pain better than pearls, and one day it will make her unstoppable. If she returns, give her what's hers. Or I will haunt you, Frank. Jesus, Mom, I whispered. You found it. said a voice. I turned so fast I nearly knocked the photo to the ground. Donna stood at the doorway, wringing her hands into the apron that never seemed to age. I left that frame just crooked enough, she said, voice cracking. I hoped someday you'd come looking. You knew this existed. She nodded. Your stepmother told me to burn it, said it was outdated invalid. But your mother, she made me promise. So I waited. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. Why didn't you send it to me? You were gone. And then, everything went quiet. And I was afraid. But afraid doesn't mean I forgot. I scanned the pages using my phone twice high resolution, then triple backed them to a secure drive. The originals went back into their sleeve and down the lining of my jacket, zipped tight behind the inner flap. Donna reached for my arm. You have to be careful, Anna. He's not what he used to be. He's worse now, since she died. From the hallway, a deep voice echoed like thunder. Donna, who's here? We both froze. I mouthed, stay quiet. Another beat, then the sound of approaching steps, slow but steady. I slipped through the study's side door out into the overgrown rose garden. Thorns caught my sleeves. Wind stung my face, but I was out. I crouched beneath the archway, breath caught halfway between fear and fury. Then I heard it. Frank's voice muffled through a phone call inside. If she found the will, we move fast. Pull the pin. You shouldn't be walking alone, said the man waiting near my motel. We're here because your silence just became dangerous. He stood with the stillness of someone trained to disappear in crowds. Civilian jacket over pressed slacks. No insignia, no name badge. But I recognized the bearing, the quiet readiness, the way his eyes swept the lot before settling on me, like I was a target he'd been tracking for hours. I'm Colonel Mitch Darden, he said as I stepped closer. Defense Oversight Division. We spoke sort of 2 nights ago. The restricted call. He nodded once, then gestured to the waiting black SUV behind him. Engine already running. Tinted windows. Government plates. We don't have much time. You're being hunted in slow motion, Commander. Thought you'd want a head start. The way he said Commander jolted something deep like a muscle memory I hadn't flexed since the day I walked away from uniform and silence in equal measure. Inside the SUV, the interior lights flickered as the door shut behind me. It smelled faintly of leather and government-grade paranoia. Darden handed me a folder as we pulled away from the curb. You were never discharged, he said. You were red-listed. That's a soft flag for contain and forget. Your file's been partitioned, not erased. I flipped open the folder. My last recorded assignment. My clearance level revoked. The reason administrative oversight. Pending review. But no dates. No signatures. They put you in a box. Anna Darden continued. CRN Hall buried you to protect certain funding routes. They needed a scapegoat with just enough ambiguity. You fit the bill, too decorated to ignore, too inconvenient to promote. I looked up. How long have you known too long, he said. But this is the first time we've had cause to reopen the oversight case. Someone tipped us off. Someone close to the inside. He didn't say Grace's name. He didn't have to. You'll be subpoenaed, he added, sliding another envelope into my lap. Defense Committee hearing in 11 days. They're reopening Operation Harrowlight for internal audit. You'll testify as protected witness under federal statute. The seal on the envelope was thick, inside a printed subpoena draft and a second document handwritten photocopied, a sealed memo from a name I hadn't heard in years, IG investigator Marcus Feld. Feld had died in 2021. Car accident, they said. But he'd been tracking military irregularities tied to CRN before he vanished from public mention. This memo was found in a box from Feld's personal effects, Darden explained. His widow turned it over last week. Didn't even know what she was sitting on. I didn't open it yet. I wasn't ready to see what Feld had put on paper that cost him his life. My phone buzzed. A new message. No name. Just a number I hadn't seen in 14 years. Ethan family doesn't like traitors, or girls with short hair and long memories. I stared at it. The calm I'd been clinging to began to twist into something colder, sharper. I typed a single line and hit send. Anna, I'll be sure to wear both to your indictment. Darden chuckled softly. You still know how to return fire. Always did. Just learn to aim better. He passed me one last item, a thin envelope marked classified, executive eyes only. This is Feld's memo, he said. I haven't read it. That's for you. I broke the seal with my thumb as the SUV rolled down a back road. Trees slicing moonlight across the windows. The paper inside was brittle at the edges. A single paragraph stood out underlined in red. Operation Harrowlight was buried to protect funding pipelines routed through private contractors. Whitaker Group is implicated. The scapegoat identified was Commander Anna Whitaker. Her name was the cost. There it was framed under dusty glass, my mother's handwriting, my name, and a will no one wanted seen. I kept the photo close, tucked in the inner pocket of my jacket like a relic. I hadn't slept much the night before. My body ran on muscle memory now. Boots, laced, tight jacket, zipped high thumb, always near the lining where the documents hid. The house was quiet when I left at dawn. Windham Hill barely stirred before 9, and I needed that quiet. It was easier to breathe when no one else was watching. The drive out to Benton County took 2 hours. Mitch had arranged it, but he wasn't coming. This one's low profile, he said on the phone. Paper trail only. Keep it off the radar. Mr. Graham's office sat behind a shuttered post office tucked between a grain shop and an antique store that smelled like mothballs and dead air. The building leaned slightly to the left like time had nudged it and no one cared to correct the tilt. Inside the walls were lined with faded certificates and dusty ledgers. A worn wooden plaque read, Notary Public, Est, 1983. The man himself sat behind the desk, hair white and thin glasses crooked. He looked up when I stepped in, confused at first, then something in his expression shifted. Anna Whitaker? He said softly. I signed your mother's will. I nodded and placed the folder on the table. He reached for it with hands that trembled just slightly. She brought it in, he murmured, eyes scanning the paper. Back in 2020, I think. She was pale that day. Wore a blue scarf. Told me not to tell your father. Said it was a backup. Just in case. Why wasn't it processed, I asked. Mr. Graham hesitated. Your father came back a week later. Said you'd been discharged. Unstable. That she changed her mind. He brought a different document. I couldn't. I wasn't sure who to believe. I felt the air tighten. And you didn't call anyone I should have, he whispered, voice cracking. But I'd known Frank since seminary school. I thought, God forgive me, I thought I was protecting her. You. He passed the document back to me. But this signature, it's mine. That much I know. No one faked this. I nodded and scanned the pages again using my secure app, then encrypted the files and sent them to Mitchell Darden. In a second email, I looped in a legal contact within the Whistleblower Integrity Network, a civilian lawyer with clearance-level proxy rights. Within minutes, Mitch replied, Mitch Darden received. This puts us on a new track. They're going to come after the assets next. You're not just inconvenient. You're a threat to their empire. I leaned back in the cracked leather chair and closed my eyes. The weight of the room settled on my chest. It smelled like old paper and varnish and a lifetime of misfiled truths. In the quiet, my mother's voice came back, not from a recording, not from a letter, from memory. The way she whispered things no one else could hear. If you ever return, she'd said once, when the house was dark and her breath came shallow, don't do it for them. Do it to finish what they feared you'd start. I opened my eyes. My phone buzzed again, this time from a friend still working at the local registrar's office. FYI, Whitaker Group just filed motion to seize Parcel 89, your mom's land, naming it Strategic Development Zone. Planned use, Veterans Center. Breaking ground next week. I stared at the message. My mother's garden, the patch of land where she used to plant daffodils in the shape of stars, turned into a monument for men who'd never earned it. I drove back in silence. Not even the radio. When I returned to the motel, the air inside felt colder than before. The hallway light flickered and the vending machine hummed a tune I couldn't place. I slid my key into the lock and froze. An envelope sat on the floor just inside the door. No stamp. No return address. Just my name printed in block letters. I opened it. Inside was a photo. Travis' eyes half-lidded, blood dark on his collar. The image looked like it had been printed from a military file, but altered, blurred, color enhanced. Across the bottom, someone had scrawled in the thick red marker, "You should have stayed buried." They erased me from the family tree, so I started planting roots elsewhere with proof. Windham County Records Office smelled like dust and disuse. A row of gray cubicles stretched across the floor, each with a plastic placard, and a bureaucrat hunched over a terminal that looked like it hadn't been updated since the last recession. I stood in front of Terminal 4, scrolling through digital property logs like I was combing a battlefield. Parcel 89 transferred March 2022, authorized by Margaret Whitaker. Except my mother died in February. I leaned closer. The signature glowed faintly on the screen, elegant, exact. Too exact. I had letters from her grocery list, scribbled reminders on napkins. I knew her hand like I knew my own. This signature had been lifted, not written. I snapped a picture, then another. Each image went to an encrypted folder already named Evidence Tree. The system timed out, and I let it. My phone buzzed. Nolan Graves, the local journalist Mitch had flagged as sharp and inconvenient to powerful people. I met him at a courthouse cafe 10 blocks away, just off the square, where reporters hovered like moths and lawyers whispered into lattes. He was already seated, thin, angular hair cut too short, eyes like razors. He didn't rise when I approached. "You're early," he said, voice dry. "Most people stall before starting fires." "I'm not most people," I replied, sliding into the seat. He nodded, almost approving. "Word is your brother's giving another press conference today. Veterans Initiative stuff. You planning to crash it?" I pulled out a folder, laid it on the table. 2 pages from my mother's will. Photocopies clean untampered. He raised a brow. "You leaked this already to test the waters." Anonymous drop. A whisper. Not a scream. He flipped through the pages. "They'll call it forged." "I expected that," I said, "which is why I have more. But first I need to know if the rumors about Ethan are true." Nolan leaned back. "Depends which rumor. The one where he doctor shopped a PTSD letter to apply for a federal redevelopment grant, or the one where he used CRN logistics receipts to justify veteran outreach funding without ever serving." I kept my face neutral, but something inside twisted. Grace's email came in seconds later, like timing had a sense of humor. Encrypted file. Subject line, CRN receipt chain. ETH verified. I opened it. The receipts were detailed supply contracts, signature lines dated and approved, and Ethan's name was on 3 of them, one of which coincided with a month I knew for certain he'd been in Ibiza drunk on a yacht. Outside the courthouse, TVs played muted footage. Ethan stood on the steps in a pressed navy suit, hair, perfect voice, louder than truth. "My sister once wore a uniform," he said, smiling like it hurt. "I carry her legacy, not her anger." I stared at the screen. Something in me broke, but it wasn't grief. It was silence. And once it cracked, it didn't stop. I scribbled on a napkin. 1 sentence. "Ready for a real quote, meet me tonight. Alone." I folded it and slid it across the table. Nolan read it, then looked at me for a long beat. "You're not the ghost they think you are," he said. "No," I answered. "I'm the one they forgot to bury properly." I left the cafe with my jacket zipped to the chin, the file drive tucked near my collarbone. The air had turned heavy, like the day was holding its breath. As I pushed open the door, a waitress caught my sleeve. She was young, too young to be this afraid. "Ma'am," she whispered, handing me a receipt. "You left this." I frowned, confused, until I turned it over. Scrawled in shaky pen across the back. "They're watching. He knows about graves. They built a monument on my mother's land and dared to call it legacy." The town hall auditorium had never seen so many spotlights. Rows of folding chairs filled the chamber in symmetrical lines, each bearing a glossy program adorned with Ethan's face. The banner above the stage read, "Whitaker Veterans Center, honoring the past, building the future." I stood in the back behind the last row near the catering table, where the silver trays of stuffed mushrooms steamed under low lights. No one looked twice at me. They never did. Frank Whitaker took the stage like a general returning from battle, though the only trenches he'd known were in boardrooms and inheritance clauses. He adjusted his microphone with a practiced hand, cleared his throat just enough to draw attention, and smiled, like he owned the room. Today, he began, we honor more than just those who served. We honor the ones who carried on when they couldn't. My son Ethan is a man who understands that legacy isn't about medals, it's about momentum, about carrying the story forward. The applause was polite, rehearsed. I found a seat near the corner, partially obstructed by a floral arrangement the size of a small car. The faces in the room blurred: donors in tailored blazers, politicians in calculated shades of patriotism, reporters with bored eyes and ready lenses. And near the front, I spotted Nolan. He didn't turn, but his fingers hovered over his phone like they were counting seconds. Ethan took the mic next, all gleam and charm. Service isn't always about standing on the front lines, he said, hands open in a gesture of humble authority. Sometimes it's about holding the line at home, about honoring those who served by building something lasting in their name. He paused, letting the weight of self-importance settle in the room. My family, he continued, has a long and complex history with national service. Some served in uniform. Others served in sacrifice. Today, we stand on ground that remembers both. The slideshow began behind him. Stock photos of folded flags, salutes at sunset. Then, Ethan, in a formal military-style jacket, clearly tailored. Medals that didn't belong on his chest gleamed under studio lighting. Another photo, him shaking hands with a mayor. And then, a group shot supposedly from family history. My body went still. I was in it. Or had been. They'd used the photo from my deployment ceremony. Only now my face was cropped out. All that remained was a slice of my shoulder, blurred and anonymous, beside Ethan's perfectly lit smile. I gripped the seat in front of me until my knuckles turned white. When the Q&A began, the first few questions were softballs. A veteran's widow asking about parking access. A city official thanking the Whitakers for stepping up. Then Nolan rose. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, voice level but cutting through the air like steel. "Will you clarify who in your family actually served in combat, and in what capacity?" The room stilled. Ethan tilted his head. "We don't like to single anyone out," he said smoothly. "We believe legacy is shared." "That's funny," I said, standing. My voice rang clearer than I expected. Every head turned. That would be me. I continued, stepping into the aisle. "Commander Anna Whitaker. And this building stands on land stolen from the woman who raised me." A murmur rippled through the audience like a wave pulling back before impact. Frank's mouth opened, then shut. Ethan's face tightened barely but enough. The practiced mask cracked for a breath. He looked at me like I was a ghost that had dared to interrupt its own eulogy. Nolan lifted his camera and clicked. The sound echoed like a bullet. "If you can't kill someone's body, assassinate their story. That's how they fight now." It started with a headline: "Commander or Coward? Anonymous sources claim breakdown during combat." The article showed up on every screen I touched, front page of a local patriot blog, trending on veteran forums, even mirrored by a conspiracy subreddit. The byline was generic. The quotes were all anonymous, but the smear was surgical. "Erratic behavior in Fallujah. Emotional collapse under fire. Refused to take command during crisis moments." None of it was true. But the worst part, the lies sounded just plausible enough to stick in the mind of someone who didn't know better. My phone buzzed again, this time a message from Grace. "They're going scorched earth. Don't believe the noise. We've seen you bleed and stand. Let 'em choke on the smoke." I tried to type a reply, but another notification popped up, a poetry blog from 2006, resurfaced and recontextualized. It was Ethan's. The poem, if you could call it that, was dripping with faux philosophy. Some warriors return with medals, some with silence, some with lies to hide the shame of survival. Back then, it had been passed around as a moody musing from a college student trying to impress his professors. Now it had a new label: insightful words from the brother of the infamous Commander Whitaker. Then came Frank's statement. Public, measured, devastating. "We love Anna. She served. But service isn't the same for everyone. We pray she finds peace and help." That word help hung in the air like a shiv. I turned off the phone and threw it across the bed. It bounced once and hit the floor with a soft thud. The motel walls felt closer than before, like they were leaning in to watch me crack. I didn't. I got in the car. The cemetery wasn't far. Just enough distance to leave questions behind and bring grief with me. I parked beside the Whitaker family plot and walked to the headstone with shaking hands. My mother's grave had been vandalized. The daffodils I replanted weeks ago were gone. The grass torn in strips, dirt exposed like open wounds. A small wooden stake jammed into the soil read, "No saints in uniforms." I knelt not to clean it, not yet. I just stared. I felt the rage like a flame pressed between my ribs, quiet, seething, clean. My phone buzzed again. It was Mitch. They filed something, he said. No greeting. Just urgency. A retroactive mental health review. With the VA. Claiming you concealed treatment. If it goes through, it'll strip your credibility. And possibly your pension. I said nothing. They want to invalidate you, he continued. Not disprove, not debate. Erase. Then they forgot who they're dealing with. I said, voice flat. Later that night, back at the motel, I stared at a small framed medal on the dresser. The Valor Cross. Real metal. Real blood. Real sacrifice. And then I saw the image on a veterans forum photoshopped. My face mid-blink and weary manipulated to look like I was crying under fire uniform smeared flag at half-mast behind me. Captioned, "She cracked. We just never told you." I felt something inside me recoil like I'd been sucker punched with my own history. And then another email. No subject, no sender. Just one line of text. Travis didn't just leave a file. Check the pin. Travis was always the quiet one. So it makes sense he'd hide the loudest truth inside something silent. The eagle pin was heavier than I remembered. It had lived in the bottom of my deployment trunk for years, wrapped in the same oil-stained cloth Travis used to clean his rifle. I hadn't touched it since Fallujah. Maybe part of me was afraid, not of what I'd find, but of what I might feel. Back in the motel room, I set the trunk on the floor, the hinges groaning like old wounds. Everything was still there. Dog tags folded, flags, sand-scuffed journals. But it was the pin I reached for. Polished brass shaped like the spread wings of defiance. The back was smooth at first. Then my thumb caught something, a seam. Very faint. Nearly imperceptible. I slid a hairpin under the edge, heart thudding. With a soft click, the back popped open. A black micro SD card no bigger than my fingernail dropped into my palm. Travis. I didn't cry. Not this time. I called Mitch. Found something, I said. Describe it. Microchip. Hidden inside Travis's eagle pin. I'm heading to Tink. Be careful. No wireless transfers. No cloud. No screw-ups. I ended the call. Tink operated out of a broken-down strip mall that reeked of burnt solder and lemon cleaner. A paraplegic vet who lost both legs in Mosul, he now patched code instead of arteries and owed me 3 favors. I was cashing in 1. The bell above the door didn't ring, it wheezed. You look like shit, Tink said as I entered. Been busy being erased, I replied. Figured. You brought war on a stick. I handed him the SD card. He wheeled over to a cracked Dell tower, inserted the chip, and cracked his knuckles. This'll take finesse, he muttered. Encrypted twice, once with a Travis-style Logic Maze classic dead man's switch. But if he left this for you? He typed like his fingers were fighting for their lives. Lines of code blinked past. I stood over his shoulder, breath shallow. Got it? He said an hour later. Playback ready. The first file was a recording. The audio hissed, then settled. Manifest says medical supplies. You and I both know that crate's intercept-grade ordnance. We move it before the UN sweep. No questions. The second voice, undeniably Ethan. Keep it off the main record. If Whitaker finds out, it dies in review. No paper trail, just results. I clenched my fists. The second file, logistic summaries. Dates, times, codes cross-matching with known fatality reports. Each one traced to a shipment Ethan approved. The third was different. A low voice. Familiar warn. Travis. If you're hearing this, I didn't survive. But she will. Anna, this is your proof. They buried me. Don't let them bury the rest. You're the only one I trusted to finish what I couldn't. End this. Tink looked up uncharacteristically quiet. That's your smoking crater. I nodded. Then I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, stared at my reflection, and said it out loud. No one else tells my story. Not anymore. My phone rang. Mitch. They just advanced your hearing. Inspector General Committee moved the timeline. You're now the key witness. I looked down at the chip in my hand, small, black, deadly. Game on. They expected a broken woman clinging to memory. I walked in with proof and the name they tried to bury. The corridor outside the hearing room smelled like disinfectant and polished boots. Too clean for truth. Mitch walked beside me, silent, his badge glinting under fluorescent lights. The guards at the double doors checked our IDs, then nodded without expression. Inside the hearing room was a modern bunker, steel glass and quiet fury. A long U-shaped table curved around a witness desk set dead center. Flags lined the back wall. U.S. Army and a banner that once meant honor. Rows of officials filled the seats, uniformed officers, civilian oversight, legal observers from both chambers of Congress. Cameras were banned, but judgment hung in the air like a knife at my throat. The chairwoman, Colonel Alexis Devereaux, rapped once on the table. This session is now in order. Commander Whitaker, you may begin. I stood. My name is Commander Anna Whitaker, formerly of Joint Command Task Group 19. I served in multiple theaters from 2008 to 2021. I was injured in Operation Harrowlight and awarded the Valor Cross. My record was red-flagged and hidden under administrative review without my knowledge for the purpose of discrediting my testimony. Today, I submit the following evidence against CRN Logistics and Whitaker Group for collusion in arms misdirection, fraudulent veteran programs, and illegal seizure of assets using falsified documentation. I place the folder on the desk. Exhibit A: audio files retrieved from a secure microchip left by Staff Sergeant Travis M. Brandt, deceased 2021. I nodded to Mitch. He tapped a key. The room filled with static, then Travis's voice. Manifest says medical. You and I both know this is intercept-grade ordnance. We move it before the sweep. No questions. Another voice, Ethan's. Keep it off record. If Whitaker finds out, it dies in review. Whispers rippled through the panel. Then came the last clip. If you're hearing this, I didn't survive. But she will. Anna, this is your proof. I looked up. Some faces had shifted eyebrows, tightened lips pursed, but others stayed blank. Bureaucracy knows how to mask the smell of rot. Commander, one panelist said, "Why wait until now to bring this forward?" I didn't flinch. Because silence felt safer than justice. Until now. I knew what they'd take, and I wasn't ready to lose it. Colonel Devereaux leaned forward. Are you stating that the Whitaker Group through CRN used your discredited status as a means of profit protection? Yes, I said clearly. They erased me to validate their lie. My mother's will was hidden. My property title falsified. I submit Exhibits B and C: original handwritten testament and forged land deed used to seize Veterans Initiative land. Mitch rose next. He confirmed the chain of custody. Backed the dates. Filed every name with dry precision. It felt less like testimony and more like battle. Every question was a volley. Every answer, a shield. Finally, Devereaux looked down the line and said, "This panel hereby recommends formal investigation into the Whitaker Group for violations of the Federal Defense Procurement Integrity Act and witness suppression under Title 10. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. The room emptied slowly. Some officials looked at me with new eyes like they were trying to reconcile the headline they'd heard with the woman who just detonated it. Mitch and I walked out together. Halfway down the hall, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. No name. Just a single message. We weren't the only ones funding CRN. Be careful. M. She never sent the letter. But she wrote it anyway, and it waited 14 years for me to be ready. The family graveyard lay quiet under an overcast sky, like the earth was holding its breath. The headstones stood in a crooked row, ancient names chiseled into stone as if permanence could wash away cowardice. I knelt before my mother's grave, fingers brushing the etched letters. Margaret Evelyn Whitaker, 1954-2021. She loved fiercely, but the world asked her to stay quiet. I wondered how many people believed that line. Wondered how many times I'd wished for one more conversation, one more chance to ask her why she left without ever warning me what would come after. Why she'd remained silent while the family rewrote my story in permanent ink. The crunch of gravel behind me didn't surprise me. Wyndham Hill had very few secrets left. My stepmother stopped a few paces away, her coat, buttoned to the throat, eyes rimmed with something that wasn't quite tears, but close. I didn't burn everything, she said. I stood slowly. Didn't you? She held out an envelope. Thick, sealed. My name written in cursive I hadn't seen in over a decade. Her hand trembled. Your mother kept it in the greenhouse, locked drawer back of the cabinet. I only found it last month. I wasn't ready to read it. And I'm not the one it was for. I took it. I lied because I was afraid, she continued. Frank told me you were unstable, that you'd ruin everything she built. I believed him. That's on me. I didn't speak. There was nothing left to say to the woman who'd watched them silence me and chose politeness over truth. She stepped back. But I never stopped being ashamed of it. That landed harder than I expected. Back at the motel, I opened the envelope on the bed, hands shaking despite myself. The letter was dated February 10th, 2021. Anna, if the world forgets, you let this remind you that I didn't. You were always the strong one, not loud but true. Your brother inherited my name. You inherited my spine. If you're reading this, I didn't get the chance to say it in person. That's my regret, not yours. I tried to leave you protection, but some wars aren't fought in courtrooms or deserts. Some are inside dining rooms and boardrooms. Inside, you'll find a document. I'm sorry it took me so long to act. But now it's yours. Tucked behind the letter was a legal report and emergency board memo signed days before her death. It outlined a secret vote Frank pushed through, diverting funds from Whitaker Group into philanthropic shell charities. Ethan's name was on several transaction authorizations. The document carried a notary stamp plus an internal audit note labeled Confidential WHKBG13. She'd known. She'd seen it happening, and instead of confronting them, she buried her truth where she hoped I'd someday dig it up. And I had. Mitch called as I was finishing the last page. I've reviewed it. It's a kill shot, he said. We add this to the audio logs, the forged deed, and Travis's final statement, and they're done. No court can ignore this. They can try, he said. But it won't stay quiet. I hung up and typed out an email to Nolan Graves. Subject, last nail. Attachment, WHKBG13.BDF. Less than 5 minutes later, Nolan responded. Story goes national at midnight. Brace for it. I stared at the letter again. At my mother's handwriting, imperfect, shaking in parts, but unbroken. They tried to erase me. She tried to protect me. And now at last I had something they couldn't touch. Proof. And legacy. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight, and for once I didn't feel like I was running out of time. They built an empire on silence. I gave it a name, and now the walls are echoing. The story dropped at 12:01 a.m. sharp. The Soldier They Tried to Silence, a Commander's Fight for Truth, by Nolan Graves, National Ledger. The article was surgical. The doctored records, the forged will, the hidden audio logs, and the voices, mine and Travis's, laid bare across every screen in America. Within minutes, it had been picked up by every major outlet. By dawn, it was trending globally. I woke to the sound of my motel room phone ringing off the hook. Are you Commander Whitaker? Will you comment on your brother's arrest? Can you confirm the DOJ inquiry? Mitch had warned me this would happen. Still, nothing prepares you for what it feels like when the world suddenly cares. I dressed slowly, deliberately. Not for TV, not for press. For the Mirror. First stop, the front lawn of the Whitaker estate. Protesters had gathered before breakfast, veterans with flags and signs, local moms with strollers, old men in military caps holding photos of fallen sons. Some held placards that read, "She wore the uniform. He wore the lie. Justice for Travis. The true Whitaker speaks." Inside the estate, no one answered the intercom. Frank tried damage control on a pre-recorded local news segment. Our family has faced tragedy, he said. Private matters should stay private. We regret any misunderstandings. He looked tired, not grieving, cornered. Ethan didn't even bother. He booked a one-way ticket to Lisbon and was arrested at Dulles International before he made it to the gate. Grainy footage showed him in a hoodie and sunglasses caught mid-step by 2 federal agents. His mouth was open in the frame, mid-denial or mid-demand. No one cared. The Department of Defense released a statement hours later. Effective immediately, all contracts and vendor privileges with CRN Hall Logistics and its subsidiaries are suspended pending investigation. That same afternoon, shareholders in Whitaker Group began resigning en masse. The board released a vague statement about internal restructuring, but the market had already made up its mind. Their stock plummeted. Legacy, it turned out, had a market cap. Nolan called me around 5. "We've been asked to syndicate the story for broadcast. You good to go on air tonight?" "I'm not a pundit," I said. "You're not. You're a witness." I agreed. The studio was small, tight walls, hotter than expected. But I sat still, camera ready, while the anchor asked me why I waited so long, why I came back. "I didn't return for revenge," I said quietly. "I returned because I realized no one else was going to carry what Travis left behind. I owed him the truth." Afterward, I walked home, yes, home. The motel felt different now. Less like exile, more like transition. On the bed sat a letter I hadn't seen earlier. No return address. Plain envelope. Inside, one line of handwritten script. "Not all ghosts die. See you at the dedication." I stared at it for a long time, the ink sharp and steady. Not Frank. Not Ethan. Someone else still watching. The fall of the Whitakers wasn't the end. It was only the clearing. I didn't build this place to be remembered. I built it so no one else would be forgotten. The morning sun spread across the lawn like a benediction, gentle, golden, undeserved. I stood at the top step of the Marcus Travis Memorial Center, just beneath the newly hung bronze plaque that bore his name. The crowd was quiet. Not the kind of quiet born of reverence, but of release. Windham Hill hadn't seen this many flags flying since the last war ended. Or maybe since the last lie fell. A row of folding chairs faced the podium. Veterans in worn jackets, young recruits with stiff collars, reporters with eager pens, and behind them the ones who came without titles, widows' children, silent witnesses to a history they were never allowed to speak aloud. Mitch stood to my left, Nolan to my right. My stepmother sat 3 rows back, hands clasped in her lap, face unreadable. But she came. That was enough. I stepped forward. When I returned to this town, I began voice steady. My name was a footnote. My record was a rumor. The people who erased me did it with pens and silence. But that's the thing about truth. It's patient. It waits. I glanced at the front row where a small boy clutched a folded piece of paper. This center isn't about me. It's not about headlines or revenge. It's about the names that never made it to plaques. The ones who saved lives in shadows. The ones who came home to nothing. The ones who were told to heal quietly or not at all. A murmur ran through the crowd. Not of unrest, of agreement. I reached down and opened a glass display case at the front entrance. Inside, Travis's eagle pin nestled against the handwritten letter he left for me. I didn't need to explain it. The room understood. The boy came up to me after the speech. Barely 10, maybe less. He wore a volunteer badge and trembling hands. "This is for you," he said. It was a crayon drawing me in uniform, standing under a sunbeam, holding out a hand to another figure who looked like Travis. Between us, a tiny flame. A light passed forward. I knelt. "What's this light mean?" He shrugged. "You're showing the way." The press caught me just as I stood again. Commander Whitaker 1 called out, "What would you say to the people who tried to silence you?" I didn't pause. "Truth doesn't shout," I said. "It endures." As the ribbon was cut and applause scattered like petals, I stepped back, letting others take the stage. This place wasn't built for me to stand at the front forever. It was built to stand long after I stepped away. When the crowd thinned and the photographers wandered toward other shots, I walked the halls alone. Clean drywall, brass signage, echoes of what had once been grief now layered into purpose. On one far wall, a single plaque waited. She carried the silence, then set it down. I touched it lightly, then walked on. They gave me medals. Then they tried to take away my voice. But this is what I wear now. The morning sun filtered through linen curtains, casting long shadows across the reclaimed pine floor of my mother's cottage. Windham Hill was still. The kind of quiet I used to fear, now I welcomed it. Outside, the flag at the Marcus Travis Memorial Center rustled in the breeze. From the porch, you could just make out the glint of brass from the entrance plaque. I slipped on a gray cotton sweater and jeans, no medals, no rank. Just breath and purpose. The Whitaker estate had been dissolved as of 9:00 a.m. I signed the last document with my given name, Anna Margaret. No need to resurrect the surname that tried so hard to erase me. Legacy isn't in the ink. It's in the choice to write something new. Nolan showed up at noon holding a slim folder. Final transcript, he said. I took out the stuff about the medals. Didn't feel like the right ending. I thumbed through the pages. He'd quoted my speech word for word, even the quiet parts. I nodded. There's interest, he added. Book deal, speaking circuit. They want your story. Maybe someday, I said, smiling faintly. But right now, I'm busy listening to others. He looked around the cottage, sunlight warming the walls, a faint smell of cedar and old books. You sure you're not just hiding, not hiding? I replied, resting between battles. Later that day, I taught my first workshop at the center. 6 veterans sat in folding chairs scribbling notes while I paced the front of the room with a dry erase marker in one hand and a warm cup of coffee in the other. The class was called Rebuilding with Honor. Not flashy, not about battlefield tactics or medals, just rebuilding inside and out. After class, a young vet with a prosthetic hand pulled me aside. I don't care about decorations, he said. I care that you stayed. I didn't know what to say, so I simply nodded and held his gaze for a long moment. Sometimes, presence is enough. Back home, I unwrapped a simple wooden shadow box and placed it on the wall above my mother's old writing desk, inside my rank insignia. I hadn't worn it since the hearing. I earned this, I whispered to the empty room. I outlived it. I choose when to wear it. Not as a shield, not as proof. Just a truth I no longer had to explain. Before sunset, I walked out to Travis's grave at the far edge of the veteran's garden. I laid down a bouquet of wildflowers, sunbright, uneven, honest. You were right, I said. They buried us wrong. But we grew anyway. As I turned back toward the cottage, I saw a figure standing at the gate. A woman, barely out of boot camp buzz cut, sharp eyes brighter than she wanted me to notice. She raised a tentative hand. Commander Whitaker. I stopped. Yes, I heard you don't shout, but you're exactly who I want to learn from. The wind moved through the trees like an answer. I stepped aside, held the gate open. Well then, I said, let's begin. After years of silence, she didn't just speak. She exposed every lie they built their empire upon. What began as exile ended as vindication, not through noise, but through the quiet weight of undeniable truth. Justice didn't roar. It arrived like a blade of light through cracked stone, late, yes, but impossible to ignore. Because when betrayal is met with proof and courage outlasts fear, even the most carefully buried secrets can't stay hidden forever. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If this story moved, you leave a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and comment your thoughts below. Type 1 if you felt seen. 2 if you think it could have ended differently.